Yeah, that's a great question, and I've actually done a lot of work in that. For many years, I was working with Fiat for over 20 years, and we had a very big leadership development program for them. And they realized, actually, I started working with them in the late 1980s because they realized that they would, they were heading for crises, which they have gone through and still go through. But the idea was, how does the organization promote, create the possibility to first identify high potential people for leadership, to support them to develop the skills they need, and then also three, to keep supporting them through the kind of challenges that will be constantly coming up. And we had, I think one thing is first having what I would call bringing awareness to leadership through a leadership model. So what that just means is, what does leadership look like? In a particular company, in a particular culture, it does not always look exactly the same. Leadership at Apple, I don't think would look the same exactly as leadership at Fiat or leadership in IBM or something. Because, first of all, there is a culture and a context, and so leadership has to somehow be ecological within that context. But the context also evolves, so the organizations evolve, and this is why also what effective leaders sometimes suddenly stop being effective, because that approach doesn't keep working. So the first was, have a leadership model that brings awareness to what are the key characteristics. Second is having some way of assessing so that people can self-assess, but also have a kind of 360-degree assessment. Then we had 4 different paths for supporting leadership in the organization. One was, simply workshops. So you could have, events that are like this, that support people. A second was what we called assisted self-development. So if you have a 360 or you get some kind of feedback and well, where do I need to improve? It's you could have a number of people sort of working together with a type of a mentor. The third was coaching, and the coaching is probably the most it's the most directed, it's the most efficient, but it's also sometimes for the company is a little bit more expensive because it's individually focused. And the fourth path was what we called project-based learning, so that in a typical coaching or in a typical training, people leave their environment, they come to some special place, they learn something, and then go back. In project-based learning, the coach actually accompanies people or into the project, so it's a real-time experience. And I think all of those are very key. And as part of the assisted self-development, we had also what we called a blended approach, which is part e-learning, part online and part face-to-face. So I think kind of beginning to build an awareness and a valuing of leadership into the culture, and having these kind of various ways of identifying what is good leadership, supporting it, and again, I don't know how to say it, baking it in, building it in, so it's not just something that you do as an extra thing, but it's valued. Steve Jobs always said, but he said something very interesting. People often talked about him as being, a micromanager, but I think it was different than that. I don't think he was just trying to control everything. He had the saying where he said, if excellence is in your environment, if it's there all around you, you don't need anything more than your own self-motivation to do excellent work. Nobody has to threaten you or reward you because it's just around you all the time. And so I think the same is true with leadership. If leadership is around you all the time, and you're constantly bringing your attention to it. I mean, just as an example with Steve Jobs, my ex-father-in-law used to sell carpets in the Silicon Valley, and he went to Apple once. He was selling carpet, right, just for the floor. He said, Steve Jobs comes to the meeting. And he said, nobody has asked me more questions before or since about the carpet than Steve Jobs. And you might think, why does the guy care about the carpet? Because it matters to him, right? If the carpet isn't excellent, if it doesn't fit the values, if it doesn't have these characters, then it's a crack in the. And I think that if companies really care about leadership, you make it something that is part of the ongoing culture. And then those were some ways, like I said, this seminars, assisted self-learning, coaching, and project-based. Second question? Yeah. Whoever's ready.
Yeah, you say that leadership is all around us in our lives and so on. Do you think that we are more focusing leadership in the context of companies and managing, or that's a more global question and we are leaders of our lives and so?
I think, Pierre, that's a great question, and I think that if I even look at why has NLP spread around the world, right? It started in, it was a little thing, in Santa Cruz. Why does it spread around the world? Is because I think we are moving more and more towards this idea of people living their own lives, which means self-leadership becomes important. But also, to me, leadership in terms of, like I was using that picture of the geese. We fly together. Those of us that are going, if we know we're going together somewhere, it's easier to do it when we go together. So we can support each other, right? This idea of the flapping of the wings creates a lift and inspiration to others. So I think that leadership is a fundamental quality that starts with self-leadership, but in every day, and we'll explore this actually in this afternoon, there are many examples of what I would call leadership moments. And a leadership moment means it's a moment when I either have to express a vision, right? Where are we going? Or encourage team cooperation, or inspire somebody to action, or be an example. And that could be with my children. That could be a leadership moment. That could be in Deborah's case, with the doctor or with myself. So I think these basic qualities of leadership, express a vision, inspire others to action, work cooperatively, be an example, those are more and more important parts of our everyday life.
And the way to inspire people?
To inspire people has to do with this, first of all, this notion of by being aligned and congruent with ourselves. And it's like when we say how does one goose start to lead the other goose? You begin to go. You go on your journey, and then you look for where is there resonance with others. For me, inspiration is primarily about resonance, meaning I share my truth authentically, and you see who else does that, awaken or inspire.
Thank you.
Okay. We will practice that. Actually, that's another thing we'll do this afternoon.
I'd like to talk about the self-leadership.
Yeah.
You talked this morning about the team inside us that
Yes.
we have to manage too.
Yes.
And I found that very interesting because most of my clients, when they have to identify what career they're going to do in the
Right.
future, there's this noise
Noise.
inside with all the members of the team
Right.
speaking all at once. And how would you say that the coach state can help them calm that noise down
Yeah.
and make sense of all this
Well, I think if you take that quote from Steve Jobs where he says, "Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice." I mean, and first of all, I read recently this interesting quote where somebody said, "The way you talk to your children will become their inner voice when they grow up." Right? So we get this programming, our own inner dialogue is often, there's many voices that we get through our lives. And then, of course, it's not only voices, but and each of these, when we talked about resonance, there's a certain quality of resonance. That they all have a certain amount of truth. Otherwise, we wouldn't even, we say in English, it would go in one ear and out the other. But it sticks because there's something. In NLP, we would say there is some positive intention. So the first key to working with any group, whether it's an outer group or an inner group, is begin to recognize the positive intention. What are they positively trying to do, either for themselves, because sometimes it's not for the rest of the group, it's just for themselves. Like some part of us is worried about their own their own benefit, or will they be paid attention to or ignored, let's say. So they get louder as they feel more. So first thing to do, and we would say in NLP-based coaching and leadership, is you have to recognize that it's there. Because again, whatever you're not conscious of runs you, right? Then the programming is running you. So A, become aware of it. B, acknowledge it without judgment. Because what happens is if we judge it, we turn it into a shadow, right? It becomes a demon. 3, by doing that, we can begin to create this idea of a hospitality, a space where you can then begin to understand it. And so this is the very key, whether it's an outer person or an inner person, inner member, we need to be able to be with it without becoming it. Right? And this is what often happens, right? People begin to become it, and then they don't know who they are, right? Bipolar is a classic example of, I'm becoming rather than being able to be with it. So the way the coach state helps is by really practicing this place of your kind of your true center. You can actually, there's a kind of wisdom that begins to develop because I can listen to all the voices without being, swayed by them or, pulled by them, and then get that sense of what is the positive intention. The Buddhists talk about the quality of equanimity, and equanimity means I'm able to meet the good and the bad from the same place of resourcefulness. So it's not like, when it's good I'm happy and resourceful, when it's bad I'm panicked and depressed. It's like I can meet them both from a place of resourcefulness. So I think the notion of the coach state is it's a leadership state. And even in my leadership work, we often talk about the difference between leadership, and leading. So leader is a role. Not all leaders have leadership, right? You can have leadership capability and not lead, too. So leading is an action. And for me, leading is not so much connected to a role as it is to a state. And I think that state is a coach state. So for me, the more that in NLP, we also talk about the importance of what we call a meta position. And meta position means it includes it but transcends. It includes the others but transcends. So, and again, this will often happen when you get many, we see it right now in the United States, right? The government is running out of money because of a certain lack of leadership, which means I've got to be able to hear the different voices, give them their space without letting them take over. And it's not always easy. It can be challenging. So the more we can practice that coach state, then if you remember my example of the pilot, you will, if you're in a dangerous situation, you will have fear, right? So what do I do with the fear? Well, if I can create the space for it, instead of it becoming a problem, right? I'm connected to something much bigger than that acknowledges it, that allows it to be there, and then ultimately, we would say that allows you to transform its expression into something more effective. So, like, instead of anger or panic or criticism being negative, it can become a different expression and then can become actually integrated as a contributing whole. So I think the coach state is when we can do that inwardly. And whatever we can't do that with in ourselves becomes our shadow in the outside. Right? What I find with people is that the things I don't know how to lead in myself, I can't lead in people outside of me, and then it becomes my problem, my demon, my nemesis. So I think the coach state allows us to develop this quality of include but transcend. Acknowledge, but not get lost in.
Really?
Sur le leadership, parce qu'après je vais passer plutôt sur le
Okay. So I have a question. What would you recommend to all the coaches here and everywhere to be successful? What are the key issues or
I think first of all, to be successful, it's a little bit like what we were saying with leadership, is you need to have an awareness and a model of success. Right? So what does success mean? Because with anything, it's like, whether you use the term leadership or success or other things, people can have really different definitions of what does that mean. And I find that, my as you know, Thibaut, the book that I'm working on right now is called Success Factor Modeling, and it's about, it's case studies of people who have been successful, well-known people like Steve Jobs, but also others. And so some of these success factors first involve having a clarity of what is success. And success, there are different levels of success. Material success is not the same as, you can even look at somebody like Steve Jobs. He was materially successful, but he died young, right? So on the level of his physical health, he wasn't successful. So first we have to realize, success is not all or nothing. Success, like leadership, can also be contextual. A lot of times success becomes, when people become obsessed with a certain kind of success, that's what takes them off of their living their own life. So what does success mean? And I usually define 5 sort of areas of success. One is career, so that has to do with your career, your business. But another is success in making a difference in the world. Right? That's what some people say, you're successful because you've made a positive difference in the world. But another is, your own personal growth. That's this guy that said, hey, my company is very successful, but there's no sparkle in my eye. He's saying, I don't feel successful right now. In fact, I feel bad going into work, even though I have a lot of money and all this. Another area is our emotional and physical balance. Because again, like Steve Jobs says, you end up being one of the richest men in the graveyard at 58 years old, or 57. So, but then another is having a group of peers. I often talk about the Buddhists talk about the 3 jewels. They say the 3 jewels are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the Buddha means it's the symbol of being the best of myself. So that's one area of success. I'm the best of me. The Dharma is my path, right? My purpose. I'm fulfilling what I'm here for. And the Sangha is my group of peers that support me in the practice to get there. So I know a lot of people where they say, you can say it's lonely at the top. So you get out there and you're succeeding and you feel alone. So I mean, I'm just giving that as an example of, first of all, what is my roadmap of what success is? Then, next part of success is that I'm able to congruently, in NLP we talk about the importance of congruence and alignment. Because if I'm not congruent, if I go, yes, but, well, it'd be nice, but, well, you're not going to go anywhere. So that sort of congruent alignment towards it, once I have a sort of clear sense of it. And then, it's like the hero's journey. Be aware, where's the threshold, right? I think one of the biggest dangers to success is past success, right? Because you get in a comfort zone and you don't want to risk it. The people don't take that step out further, out over the threshold. And this is where you see these companies that are very successful and then they disappear, right? Because things change. In NLP we say the map is not the territory, but the territory isn't even the territory, because the territory yesterday isn't the territory today or tomorrow. And so this whole notion of the hero's journey, where's the threshold? And what was my threshold 2 years ago isn't my threshold today. And I've got to keep going over that threshold, keep finding my guardians, keep facing demons, basically stay on the journey. Which means, in the sense of guardians then, in my work, belief is an extremely key part of success. As one person in my very successful entrepreneur, woman, said, she said, if you don't believe in what you're doing, you should be doing something else. It's that simple. And if you don't believe in yourself, you're not going to be able to, follow through with what you need. So again, sort of having a clear definition, a congruent and aligned focus, and then, the support to get there, and the belief system that allows you to get there. So that's what I would say here. Vision, belief, and then continue to grow, continue to push the edge. And when you stop, you stop.
Du coup, ça peut être l'occasion de rebondir sur une partie un peu plus concrète avec ICF ou pas? Non? Sur, du coup, expliquer peut-être pourquoi Robert Dilts par rapport à ce qu'on disait sur la notion de coach, sur comment est-ce qu'on voit le coaching, est-ce que ça peut pas être l'occasion de rebondir? Non?
Si, c'est toujours l'occasion. Je pense que ce qu'ICF essaye de faire, c'est à la fois de donner cette direction sur le fait que le professionnalisme de notre métier, c'est notre vision, quelque part. Pour nous, il ne peut pas y avoir de coaching dans l'excellence et la performance, parce qu'avant l'excellence, il y a quand même la performance, c'est le premier niveau, sans professionnalisme. Donc ça, c'est notre direction. Ensuite, c'est un chemin continu, donc on est intimement convaincu, et toute notre démarche de professionnalisation est basée là-dessus, qu'on apprend tous les jours et on ne grandit qu'en remettant continuellement les chevaux, en fait, le travail sur les chevaux, parce qu'en fait, dans notre métier, le client nous devance. Le client est devant nous. Et c'est lui qui nous amène en fait les nouvelles issues, les nouveaux sujets, etc. Et qui vient nous faire contacter nos ombres. Donc on a quelque part peut-être cet alignement qui nous permet de trouver nos ombres, de toucher nos ombres plus facilement. Mais si on n'est pas dans cette démarche continue d'évolution, on ne va pas les dépasser. Et donc pourquoi Robert? C'est parce que justement il y a ce double alignement qui est l'alignement je dirais vertical, très ancré sur des outils concrets. Vous voyez comment est construit le séminaire, avec des méthodes, des outils, etc. de la pratique, hein, on l'a dit beaucoup et on va encore le dire, c'est-à-dire que on ne peut correctement coacher dans notre métier que si on marche notre propre parole, que si on pratique nous-mêmes notre propre alignement. Et au-delà de cet ancrage très terrain, d'accord, de la pratique des outils, il y a toute l'inspiration dont parle Robert aussi, qui est cet alignement vers le haut, d'aller chercher quelque part cet éveil à la conscience de quelque chose qui nous dépasse et que même en tant que coach, on n'a pas forcément la claire vision. En tout cas, on sait qu'il y a quelque chose au-dessus qui nous appelle. Et puis après, il y a tout ce travail horizontal du je et du nous, qui est le propre de l'association. C'est-à-dire qu'un coach tout seul, eh ben, il ne va pas se développer. Donc il se développe aussi au contact d'une communauté. Et il y a cet enrichissement mutuel qui fait que chacun apporte à l'autre. Et par les pépites de chacun, on enrichit sa propre pratique. Et on a cette intime conviction.
About the tools of the coaching. So you talk a lot about NLP, and you have also hypnosis, external hypnosis. But for you, is there any distinction between hypnosis and NLP?
Well, in terms of tools, I would say the distinction is less. It's more a matter of context. Usually, if you think about hypnosis, it's a certain relationship. You have somebody who's a hypnotist, and the hypnotist is creating this trance for the other person. Whereas in coaching, it's not so much the hypnotist is more of a guide, and it's more you expect the hypnotist is going to be the reference point. So, and of course with hypnosis, if you think about it, there's a lot of mystique about it, and it's the whole focus of hypnosis is on the unconscious. And so you're going as quickly as you can in the unconscious. In NLP, you have much more of a, this movement between the conscious and the unconscious, conscious, unconscious. So I would say the main difference between NLP and hypnosis is the degree and the role to which the conscious cognitive mind plays.
Okay.
It plays a much bigger role in NLP and coaching, but obviously NLP has its roots very much in the Ericksonian form of hypnosis. So we use this idea of the creative unconscious. Steve Jobs talks about the heart and the intuition. Well, that's how do you get to that? And hypnosis is it's a method and a set of tools for accessing the unconscious and the creative unconscious. But I would say it's if I'm going to a session specifically of hypnosis, I'm expecting that I'm going to probably spend most of the time in some other than conscious state, some kind of trance state. I'm going to spend most of the time in this place of where I'm not really emphasizing my cognitive consciousness. If I go in for coaching or NLP, I'm going to expect that probably it's going to be guided much more by the conscious cognitive.
Okay. And for you, the evolution of NLP, what will happen?
Well, I always like to say that we're already in a third generation, and I mean not just that because you have generations of trainers and people and developers, but NLP itself started much more with a focus of a cognitive. People used to think of it as it's a cognitive science or even a cognitive therapy. Well, now it's not it's much more than a therapy, and it's not just about the cognitive. There's a lot of emotional intelligence. There was a very important period of emotional intelligence, or what we also call the somatic mind.
Okay.
And then there's a the third generation incorporates even more of what we call a field mind, which is the mind that's not here or here, but that's here.
The meta states?
Yeah, well, but it's more between us. It's not here,
Okay.
it's here, meaning that there is this idea of 1 + 1 makes 3. It's not my mind, it's not your mind, it's our mind. And that makes a possibility for something I would never think of, you would never think of, but together it's obvious, you know. And this is where you get this a lot of what we call this the essence of generative collaboration. And I'm doing a lot of work right now with Steve Gilligan, so he comes much more from the hypnosis background, and I'm coming more from the NLP. But the work we're doing together is around this idea of generative coaching, generative collaboration, that is how you use this quality of a field to make the possibility for something new to emerge that is not coming from my knowledge base and my experience or your knowledge base and your experience. It's this kind of resonance that where something can come that, again, no matter how much you work by yourself or I work by myself, we'd never get there. But it can happen immediately and spontaneously. And people like Erickson used to use that. He often said, I don't know what I'm going to say to my client until I'm saying it, because I'm not planning it, but it's what's being, sort of, you could say, channeled, but it's being not channeled by like somebody going into a channeling state. It's what becomes possible when we are together, two persons are together, and there's a kind of resonance. I like to point out, if you think about even human language, it's very interesting. If you isolate one child, like these children that are raised by animals or isolated, they're like, often they appear to be really, they never learn language, they act like an animal, their intelligence is often very low. But two together, they make their own language. They'll make a language. They will. So language doesn't come from us by ourselves, but it comes naturally. Again, you put two together, and it will spontaneously. So I think this is the interesting thing. Yeah. So there's and I think NLP is really trying to look at this. This is this area of energy, that is kind of still, when we first started NLP, the whole area of psychology and hypnosis was much more this, you have to be careful, you have to have a white coat to do anything psychological. And it was, I often like to say it's a little bit like the development of the personal computer. Before Apple, to work with a computer, it was like you had to be a specialist, and it was kind of like Big Brother, and then Apple came along and said, no, anybody can do it. Well, now you've got iPads, iPhones, so it's even more, and the internet, which is, it's more of this, so I think, but what I mean by what NLP is doing is really trying to look at what are the qualities by which you can make this kind of generativity happen, because people think of it as this kind of, it's magical or it's even strange, it seems unusual that something just comes, and it can sound like, when you talk about channeling, it sounds new age. But what NLP can always do is by turning these things into tools, then it demystifies it, and you go, then it's not so